Now, instead of talking about the week's Torah portion, we're talking about Pesach because it's starting on Monday night. So one of the big things that we all, again, that still just read that we know about Pesach is that we don't have anything leavened. We don't have anything chametz, which means anything that where flour or water, flour from any of the 5 types of grains. We don't eat on Pesach, right? It was basically anything. Right? Because the way they make matzah, even where they mix the flour and water, has to be in and out of the oven within 8. It has to be from the time the water touches the flour, has to be out of the oven within 18 minutes from that point. It's normally done within like 8 or something. Like they basically flying through the whole process to make sure nothing becomes chametz. And it's one of the things everyone's been most people grew up knowing, and Jews have been traditionally very, very strict about this in general. Cleaning out their homes, making sure there's not even a speck of chametz in their houses. Right, and people went, and then there's famously on Pesach, there's people took a lot of stringencies. They call them a chumrah, stringency on themselves to make sure that nothing, that there's no chametz in their house. For instance, my parents don't use basically anything processed that's out of the house except from outside the house, except for wine, matzah, and gefilte fish, which my grandmother actually used to make, but my mother decided that was a step too far. But she won't even use oil. She uses like chicken fat for Pesach to cook with instead. All right, that's like an example. And there's people that make their own wine, even make their own matzah. Just like that's the extent people take it to. But if you think about it, the thing that's the closest to chametz that we have is matzah, right? That's the only thing we have on Pesach that's flour and water mixed together is matzah itself. So once it's mixed, once it's baked, obviously it's not going to become chametz. But when they knead it, again, as I said, they do it very, very fast. So there's a chance that a little bit of flour stayed inside the dough, and now you're gonna have flour in the water, and flour in the chametz, and flour in the matzah. That's the word I was looking for. Flour in the matzah, and then if it touches water, it might become chametz. That's why in Chabad, or in Chabad and a lot of other Hasidic communities, they're very careful about not having called matzah shruya or gebrux. We don't mix any of our matzah with water. Right? We're very careful that we leave our matzah. We have our matzah, and then many people have it only in the beginning of the meal and then take out the rest of the food or eat it over a bag to make sure that none of the crumbs mix in with with water, just out of this far off possibility that maybe a little bit of flour was left in the matzah, and then that mixed with the water and it became chametz.
What about matzo ball soup?
So we don't have matzo ball soup on Pesach.
Okay, and no farfel.
Not for us.
Okay, that's a shame. I didn't know.
Yeah.
But why? What difference does it make?
Because technically, it's again out of this extreme stringencies that many people take upon themselves for Pesach, that there is sometimes flour inside the matzah, which didn't get fully baked. And then maybe if it touches the water, maybe you'll turn into chametz, and we don't even want to risk it, so we don't do it. And this is not Jewish law; it's more of a chumrah.
What's a chumrah?
Chumrah, it's a stringency.
Okay.
It's extra stringency that we take upon ourselves, which is the same thing as my parents. We don't use anything outside of our house, except for very specific items. Like we won't have like the kosher Passover coat or all that other stuff. For the same reason, because we don't know and we're worried that maybe I don't have control over it, so that's why we don't have that stuff. And then so for this, Chabad in particular is very, very strict, where we don't let our matzah touch water. So in this custom is actually talked about in the Code of Jewish Law by the first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, who wrote the Code of Jewish Law. It's in text number 1.
I have read all that you have written in your letter, and I enclose herewith a brief response regarding the issue of cooking crumbled matzah. The truth is, there's no outright prohibition against doing so. Nevertheless, one who acts stringently shall receive blessings. That is not a ridiculous stringency without any basis. Rather, there's a strong basis for observing this stringency, namely avoiding the possibility of transgressing the biblical prohibition against eating chametz. We can plainly observe that many times flour remains on the surface of some matzot, even after they have been baked. This happens because the dough was tough and not kneaded thoroughly, and the minute amount of flour that is on the matzah can become chametz. If the piece of such matzah are placed into soup, as many are accustomed to doing, one inadvertently transgress a biblical prohibition.
Inadvertent.
Can
right?
inadvertently
it's not an automatic, but it's potential.
Right.
So the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, he's ruling that it's not. This isn't the crazy. This isn't such a crazy stringency because we have seen instances where it happened, and you could, and it's a good thing to do, basically.
It
So
doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
well, so he's saying of the stringencies, this isn't the craziest of stringencies.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's not ruling this as Jewish law. He's not saying that this is a thing that one has to do. He's saying if one chooses to do it, you're not a crazy person for choosing to do it.
Okay.
That's kind of what Alter Rebbe is saying.
Okay.
It's a good thing to do if one chooses to do it.
Right.
Right? So we took this seriously, and we're very, very, in Chabad, we're very, very careful about it. This says in text number 2, Ron, you want to read for us?
We are extremely careful to avoid consuming matzah
Sharuya. It means the matzah that touched water.
Therefore, the matzah on the table are covered at all times, so that water does not spill onto them. Before we pour water or any other liquid that is mixed with water into a cup or a bowl, we inspect the cup or bowl to ensure that there are no crumbs of matzah in it. When we wash our hands during and after the meal, we do not pass our wet hands over our lips.
Which we do after every other type when we have a meal, which is what's called bayam achron, and afterwards we wash your fingertips and your lips. That we don't do on Pesach because we're worried about this. Again, so we don't have matzah balls, we don't have matzah brai, right? And this is all for the first 7 days of Pesach. For the 8th day of Pesach, the Alter Rebbe adds on something special. That's in text number 3. Bill.
Nevertheless, one who is lenient on the final day of the holiday for the sake of rejoicing on the holiday has nothing to lose.
Right. So on the last day of Pesach, which is called Achron Shel Pesach, the end of Pesach, we're fine. You could, if you want, we dip our matzah into water, into our soup. It's okay on the last day. Right? And then the Alter Rebbe said it's okay. But in practice, we actually find that in Chabad, we take it more than that it's just being okay. We make sure to do it. We have it in every type of one of our foods. We make sure we do this matzah. We mix matzah with liquids, as it says in text number 4.
Oh, sorry, Beverly.
Beverly.
Okay.
I knew that.
Yeah, I knew you knew that. It doesn't make you can call me anything you want. Just say, hey, you. Go ahead.
Beverly.
My saintly father, the Rebbe, I'm not going to pronounce that, was particularly to specifically eat matzah sharua on Asherin Shel Pesach. The entire Passover, he was particular to not eating matzah together with any other type of food. But on Asheron Shel Pesach, he would do so deliberately, exhibiting this custom in public. He would eat matzah with the fish, with the soup, and with the meat.
Right, but that's not what the Alter Rebbe wrote. He wrote that it's okay. If you want to do it on the last day of Pesach, it's technically okay to do. We took it, the first coming from this tradition that we have, going back to the 5th Chabad Rebbe, to the extreme, where we make sure to have it in every single thing. We dip our matzah in our soup. We'll have it with our salad. We'll have it with our meat. Some people, they put it in their wine. Just, everything we have should have gebrach. Everything should have this wet matzah in it. So how does this make sense? In general, most Hasidic groups, and especially Chabad also, were very, very careful with customs. To the extent that in Russia, they were risking their lives to even just go to a mikvah before daven. Many men go to mikvah before they pray in the mornings. They would risk their lives to do that, just for a custom. So why do we suddenly take this leniency technically on the last day of Pesach where it shouldn't apply, and just go all out and just, I'm allowed to do it and just do it in every type of food that we have. Right? What?
Do you want me to answer the question? No.
If you have a guess, you're welcome to answer. If you have an answer, you're welcome to answer.
I believe that enslavement is about restriction and obedience and being, subjugated. And that on some level, like doing that to yourself, where you kind of make sure that everything is a certain way. And then when you're, because of the story of Passover, when you're finally like out of Egypt, that is when it's like almost like a metaphor. It's like that's when you put matzah and everything. That's when you can kind of indulge.
It's a really interesting point. I never thought about that. No, it's a very interesting point. It's slightly connected to that, the answer. It's not fully that answer,
Yeah.
but it's definitely slightly connected to that. It says the last day of Pesach is connected to Mashiach, right? It's connected to Mashiach, and that's why we're going to study why that means it's okay, or it's connected to the final Messiah. But to go back to why we're so strict about eating it with every single thing, we'll bring an example from the Talmud, from the Gemara, where there was a similar story like this. On Sukkot, there's a mitzvah to take the lulav, the etrog, the hadas, the myrtle branch, and the ravot, the willow branch, the willow, and shake them all together. So there's an argument of what the hadas is supposed to look like. Right? What's the hadas supposed to look like exactly? So as it says in the Talmud in text number 5, I think Ron, we're up to you.
A dense leaved branch is valid for the mitzvah, and one that is not dense leaved is invalid. What is the definition of dense leaved? Rav Yehuda says it is a branch that has 3 leaves emerging from the same stem. Rav Kahana says, even if only 2 leaves emerge from one stem and a 3rd leaf emerges from another stem, just below those 2, it is valid. Rav Achka, son of Rava, says, would deliberately seek a myrtle branch with a 2 one-leaf configuration, since Rabbi Kahana ruled that it was valid.
Right. So since Rabbi Kahana ruled that as valid, and as his student, Rav Acha Barav, son of Rav, decided to show that he agrees with his teacher's thing, that even though his teacher didn't say it's the best way to have it, he wanted to show that it's okay to do, so he would make sure to do that. So there is an idea of following what your teacher's teaching, where he teaches something's okay, and follow it and do that opinion, right? Even if the other way is okay also. So maybe that's what we're doing here. But that would answer why we were not careful, maybe then on the last day. Like we'll be okay, like we're not as careful, we'll have matzah on the table. Well, why do we it doesn't make sense why we make sure to have it with everything. Like every single thing we eat, then we have to make sure to be like, to go to the extreme undo it. Maybe we should have just one food. Like everyone has it with soup, so we'll have it with soup. Why do we go to the extreme, make sure we have it with every single food, and just go to the extreme on that? Yes.
You want me to answer?
Sure.
I think it's important because I feel like what I was taught, like matzah basically represents almost life, like was the life that kept people alive. And that I think having it with everything is basically honoring the fact that this piece of food kept us alive and that we need to eat it. It's the most important thing to eat. That's all.
It sounds like it. It's a very nice point also.
Okay.
Not disagreeing with that point at all. All right. So that's our questions and potential answers. Okay, so what's Pesach all about in general, right? It's not such a simple answer that on Pesach we got out of Egypt and that's the whole story, right? So, well, if that is definitely part of the story. But then what are we celebrating on the last days of Pesach, right? Why is it a holiday the last 2 days also? The first 2 days of the holiday, we understand that's the days we got out of Egypt, so that's the holiday part. That's where we're not supposed to work or anything. And we have intermediate days, and then we have a holiday at the end. So what's the point of the holiday at the end? What's the idea behind that? So it says in text number 6, I think, Phil?
The first day of Passover is our holiday commemorating how God liberated us from Egypt. That was the first redemption, and it was carried out by Moses, the first redeemer. That was the beginning. The final day of Passover is our holiday celebrating the future redemption, when God will send Mashiach to liberate us from our current and final exile. Mashiach will be the final Redeemer. The first day of Passover is Moses' day of celebration. The final day of Passover is Mashiach's day of celebration.
Right, so that's why we have a holiday, and the connection between the last day of Pesach, Achron Shel Pesach, the last day of Pesach, and Mashiach, and the Messiah and the Messianic redemption, is also showed in the Haftorah. The Haftorah is the additional part of the prophets that we read after the Torah every Shabbat. On the Haftorah that we read on that day, it's the prophecy from Isaiah talking about what's going to happen when Mashiach comes in great detail. So Isaiah describes who Mashiach will be in text number 7. We're back to you, Beverly.
Okay. 1. And a shoot shall spring forth from the stem of Jesse, and a twig shall sprout from his roots. And the Spirit of God shall rest upon him, a spirit of wisdom and understanding, a spirit of counsel and heroism, a spirit of knowledge and fear of God. And he shall, that was 2. 3. And he shall be animated by the fear of God, and neither with the sight of his eyes shall he judge, nor with the hearing of his ears shall he chastise. And he shall judge the poorly justly, and shall chastise with equity the humble of the earth, and shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips. He shall put the wicked to death. That's number 4. Number 5. After righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faith the girdle of his loins. Righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faith the girdle of his loins.
We acknowledge this fact of the connection between Pesach, the last day of Pesach, and Mashiach, with a special meal that the Baal Shem Tov, the first Hasidic the founder of Hasidism, instituted. That's in text number 8. I think Ron.
We lose Ron?
Ron, back to you, Ron.
Okay. It was the custom of the Baal Shem Tov to partake of 3 meals on the last day of Passover. The last of these he called Mashiach's Seudah, the festive meal of Mashiach. For on the last day of Passover, the radiance of Mashiach is openly revealed.
Right. So that's why, and that's how the Baal Shem Tov decided to commemorate the fact that the last day of Pesach is connected with Mashiach. So the difference between the first redemption from when we left Egypt and the ultimate future redemption, which we hope should happen today, is not just that one was earlier and one's later. It's not just a simple matter of time, but there's actual differences. There's physical, qualitative differences that are going to happen, that happened then and will happen in the future. That differences between the two of them. When we left Egypt, we ran out. It says that we literally ran out of Egypt, right? Why did we run out? Even when Pharaoh said we could leave, we just ran out. Why did we run out? Because Egypt was such a dark and terrible place. We just had to leave. We just ran out of there, and we just left. There's also a very spiritual aspect to it, that the spiritual state of Egypt was a very dark place. Also, it was very much against God's will. So we just had to run out of there and leave as fast as we could, so we would stop being influenced by the perverse ways of the Egyptians. So unfortunately, the Jews, over the 210 years that they were in slavery, were getting very influenced by the Egyptians. It says the only things that the Jews did not switch was their dress, their names, and their language. Everything else they did in Egypt. They were serving idols and all the rest of it and going against God. The only things they kept were their names, their dress, and their language. So when liberation came, it was important that they got out right away. We don't want to be influenced by this anymore, and just leave. We're done. Right? And we're trying to get off the spiritual level of Egypt that we were leaving at that time. So when Mashiach comes, and when God willing go to the land of Israel, theoretically you would think would be the same way, right? The world nowadays is not exactly always going in accordance with God's will. So maybe we're also going to have to run. It's going to be instantaneous. We're going to run out, and that's it, just right away. So that's not exactly what will happen, though, as it explains in text number 9. I think Phil.
For not with haste shall you go forth, and not in a flurry of flight shall you go. God goes before you, and your rear guard is a guard of Israel.
Right. So when we leave this exile, God willing, it's not going to be in haste. We're going to go. We're just going to leave. It's not going to be running out the same exact way. We're going to go like calmly, right? We're not going to run out. So what's the difference? In Egypt, Egypt and the U.S. are different than, let's say, we're in the United States. So Egypt and the United States are different in some ways, right? But whether we're in the U.S. or we're in somewhere else in the world, it might not be as bad as Egypt, definitely in the way that we're being treated, thank God, but in the spiritual state, in certain aspects, it might even be worse nowadays, what the spiritual state of the world is than it was in Egypt in those days, in some aspects of it. So what's the difference then? Why should we not run out when Mashiach comes? And the same way we ran out of Egypt. If we won't want to be influenced by the spiritual depravity happening in this world, theoretically we should just run away also. Why are we leaving this world calmly when we left Egypt so fast? Because of that similar spiritual depravity that was happening there. So why? Why? Because there's not going to be anything to run away from. When Mashiach comes, the whole world's going to be transformed over into serving God. Versus we're in Egypt, only the Jews left Egypt. When Mashiach comes, the whole world is going to be leaving, I guess, so to speak, Egypt, right? The whole world's going to be leaving leaving the spiritual depravity that they're in now and moving on to a higher spiritual state. The whole world's going to become a holy place.
Okay, I'll ask a question. Okay, let's keep going.
As explained in text number 10.
Me?
Totally.
And it shall come to pass that day, said the Lord of hosts, I will cut off the names of the idols from the earth, and they shall no longer be mentioned. Also the false prophets and the spirit of impurity I will remove from the earth. That's in Messiah.
Yeah,
Mashiach.
So the difference between the Egyptian redemption and the redemption of Mashiach of the Messianic age is also in the way that we can see it practically in the way that we observe Pesach. So chametz represents the evil of Egypt. Chametz defining feature is that it's leavened, it's swelled up, it's full of hot air, it's full of they call them balgaiva. They're full of ego. It's all about egotistic, about ego, it's all about your ego, right? Which is the root of all evil, right? At the end of the day, when you're when you're egotistic, right? It ends up leading you to on the path to everything else, right? Which enslaves our soul even more than anything that Egypt could have done to us. That's why on Pesach, one of the reasons, the spiritual reason we get rid of matzah, we're getting rid of chametz, is we're getting rid of all the evil in our lives. We're getting rid of that ego, and hopefully, and making us better, right? That's why we get rid of the chametz to leaven the ego, right? And that's why on Pesach, when we're showing that when we're commemorating leaving Egypt, we don't have chametz. That's the reason. So if that means for us to not having matzah balls in Chabad, right, because we're so careful about chametz, that's something we'll put up with in order to run away from this ego, and run away from this ego trip that we might have from having having the slightest remote possibility of having chametz. That's enough for us to avoid it, because we don't want to have any of this ego on Pesach. But on the last day of Pesach, it's all about Mashiach. We're already in this somewhat messianic mode. We're in this Mashiach mode, right? Yes, we're still living in exile at the moment, and chametz is still 100% forbidden. We cannot even start opening up a cake or having some challah on the last day of Pesach. But we can relax a little bit. We're not as strict anymore about having that. We're not strict anymore about having that wet matzah, right? Because what's the time Mashiach is that the whole world's going to be transformed over. Even technically chametz in those days, while we won't have chametz today again, we could relax and have this matzah shruya, this gebrux, this wet matzah, because we're in the times of Mashiach already, and it's being transformed. So we're not as strict at that time. And this transformation is also alluded to in the Haftorah of that day, which has some of the most well-known verses about Mashiach, about the redemption. That's in text number 11. Ron.
And a wolf shall live with a lamb, and a leopard shall lie with a kid, and a calf and a lion cub and a fatling shall lie together, and a small child shall lead them. And a cow and a bear shall graze together, their children shall lie, and a lion, like cattle, shall eat straw. And an infant shall play over the hole of an old snake, and over the eyeball of an adder. A weaned child shall stretch forth his hand.
Right? So not only will the bears and the wolves become tame, but even the serpent will become a child's plaything. And the serpent is basically the example that we always give for the Sahara for our evil inclination. Right? So evil inclination itself will become just a plaything and become a holy thing. Like it won't be trying to influence us anymore when Mashiach comes. So, and again, when Mashiach comes, chametz will be permitted. But until Mashiach comes, chametz is absolutely forbidden. But since we're in this Mashiach mode, we're hopefully, God willing, we're going to get taken out of the exile right away. We lean up a little bit and we start having this matzah shria with this wet matzah. Because with every bite, we're like, yeah, we're having this because we're in Mashiach mode, because we want Mashiach. We're feeling Mashiach's coming right now. That's why we're having it. Every single bite of this wet matzah that we have, we feel that it's the time of Mashiach already coming in. Right? That's why we are so careful to have so much, because we want to have so much of this feeling of Mashiach. Right? So that's why we're careful on every single bite just to have, or every single food that we have, to have more of this and more and more and more of this matzah, of this wet matzah, just to get that Mashiach feeling, right? To keep that Mashiach feeling in every single bite that we do. Honestly, it's the easiest way for me to eat matzah, because matzah is not one of my top 10 or 50 favorite foods, but I eat it just for the mitzvah itself. That's my thing on Pesach. Yeah, nah, my thing.
Matzah and butter. Can you eat matzah and butter?
So, like on Pesach itself, I wouldn't. But then after Pesach, I don't eat matzah because I hate stuff. All right. So how do we get to this point of feeling Mashiach? Right. It's not just that it's that day. That right. It's not just that it's the day of the last day of Pesach that is Mashiach. We actually work hard to get to this point, or we work hard on transforming ourselves. How do we do this? So we know the general story of how we left Egypt, right? We left Egypt. There was the Exodus. There was the 10 plagues. Then Pharaoh got fed up with the 10 plagues and didn't want to die on the plague of the 10th of the firstborn. So he told Moshe, "Get out, leave now. We're done." And we run out of Egypt, right? The matzah, we didn't have time for the dough to rise. The matzah bakes on our backs, and that's where we have matzah today. Then we leave Egypt. We get to the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. We're stuck. This Moshe hits the water. The sea splits. We cross it. The water comes crashing down on the Egyptians. That actually happened on the 7th day of Pesach. And then what's the whole point of leaving Egypt was to go get the Torah. Right? So, but when the Jews were in Egypt, as I mentioned before, they weren't just physically enslaved, they were also spiritually enslaved, right? They were becoming more and more like the rest of the nations. They were just doing everything. They were doing idolatry and many other sins, unfortunately, in that time also. So it says in text number 12, I think we're up to Ron. No? Who read left?
Ron.
Okay.
All right.
I come after Ron.
Bill.
Wine. I can't keep track anymore.
Finally, a thought of me. When the Jews were in Egypt, they became sullied and corrupted by all forms of impurity, to the point that they were under the influence of 49 powers of impurity.
Right, and that's 49 out of 50. We were almost fully gone, right? The Jews were basically almost fully gone on these deep levels of impurity. So there's 50 levels of impurity, right? And we really weren't doing so well spiritually. If we were almost done there, right? We're not doing so well right there. And that's a problem. Why is this a bigger problem? Because in 49 days from after we left Egypt, what are we getting? We're getting the Torah. And we can't get the Torah in such a deeply abysmal spiritual state. So over the next 7 weeks, when we left Egypt, we crossed the Red Sea and we're traveling to the desert, we're becoming more and more spiritual. We were transforming ourselves and working on ourselves and becoming better and better and better. And by the time the giving the Torah came, we went from being almost the deepest level almost the deepest lows, right? Just one step away from the deepest of lows you get to the highest of highs, right? Over those 49 days and 7 weeks, the Jews transformed themselves from the worst to the best. And this process of transformation and self-refinement is the time known as Sfirot HaOmer. right? Which is the days that we count. We're supposed to, every day from after the second day of Pesach, we count. Tonight is 1 day to the Omer. Tonight is 2 nights to the Omer. And then after the first week, we say tonight is 7 days, which is 1 week to the Omer. And we keep counting up like that. Right. So in addition to just counting, it's also about a deep spiritual thing, because the way we count, as it explains in text number 13.
I'm on 13.
Yes. I'll give you a turn now.
Okay, this is what we begin counting. This is what, okay, I was gonna say this one. This is what we begin counting on the first day of Passover. We count the days as well as the weeks, for it is a mitzvah to count both days and weeks. For each day we exist one power of impurity and replace it with the power of purity.
Right, so in this process, spiritual transformation is the subject of many, many thousands of hours of talks. And we're not going to get fully into that tonight because there's not enough wine to go through that whole time. We're going to go over quickly, briefly. There's 7 basic emotions, which are known as the attributes of the soul, or kochos hanefesh, or the midot. That's how they're known. They're known in Hebrew. And these 7 attributes are the bedrock of a mature, fulfilling human experience. Once they get distorted, that's where we start getting into problems. So, to give an example, like love is one of the emotions, right? An emotion is a motive attribute. So love could be used either a good thing or a bad thing. If you love your family, you love your parents, you love your students, you love studying, that's all good love. But if we start loving, God forbid, someone's addicted, they love drugs, they love alcohol, right? They love food, then you start getting into problems. And then addiction has to be dealt with, obviously, with a therapist or something. We're not saying that it all could be solved from just talking here today and figuring out how to get things in order. But it's okay to like things, right? Someone could like having a glass of wine every once in a while. You could like having a little bit of food every once in a while. But love, when you love something like that, that's when you run into issues. We're supposed to love other things. We're supposed to love, again, your family and things like that. That's what we're supposed to love. Right. So how do we work on ourselves to love only good things, right? Not going to the addiction. Let's say we're not addicted to something, but how do we get ourselves to love only things that we're supposed to love? That's what the whole point of the spiritual Omer and working on our midos is all about. Working on our attributes are all about. Right? It's to keep working on directing our love of all these things to the refined end of it. Right? As I mentioned before, there's 7 attributes, which is chesed, which is kindness or love, gevura, which is severity or discipline, tiferes, which is compassion, empathy or balance, netzach, which is boldness, ambition, determination, hod, devotion, humility, yesod, which is connection, and malchus, which is nobility and implementation. And each of these 7 attributes have, of course, we need a bigger explanation than what I'm giving here today, but that's a very brief explanation. So each week during the 7 weeks of the Omer, of the spiritual Omer, we work on refining one of these attributes. Actually, after we count the Omer, we say a paragraph. And we say, and tonight's thing is it's chesed shebechesed, right? That tonight's we're working on this attribute. We're working on the attribute of kindness, and in the attribute of kindness itself, it's actually also split up into 7, because there is the kindness of kindness, and then there's the severity of kindness. We have to learn where to put our kindness towards. And of course, then you'll have the tiferes, how to work in compassion of kindness, and what we should be compassionate in, and going through all the rest of them also, right? There's a different section in there's 7 different ways of working into our kindness, and at the end of the week, we have now fully transformed our understanding of kindness and our in ourselves, and now we know what proper kindness is, and that's how we should go forward with the attribute of kindness. Then the next week we do gevura, we do severity, but then of course there's kindness and severity, like how you're supposed to do severity exactly, etc., etc. That's why the Zohar says that you're supposed to count those days in that way also, right? You say the day is chesed shebechesed, gevura shebechesed, etc., etc., right? Severity of kindness, kindness of kindness. Right, and etc., etc. So when we're leaving Egypt, when we left Egypt, again, Egypt is is chametz, right? Egypt was all about our ego. We just cared about ourselves. We didn't care about anyone else. We didn't care about God. And all of our attributes, all these 7 attributes that we have, slid off from being worked out in the right way to do something, all the way to the opposite end of not of doing something wrong, right? Of doing the wrong thing. All right, and that's what Egypt was. It was all about the ego, the self-importance. So in Pesach, the beginning of our spiritual journey, we purge chametz from our soul. We purge out all the chametz. And that's why we're so careful with everything. We want to make sure there's not a remote possibility of having chametz anywhere. We clean our house upside down. And also, that's why we're careful not to have this wet matzah, because we don't want to have even the remote possibility of having chametz. And then we get to Shavuos, we get to the end of the 7 weeks, and we transform all of our attributes, and we're good again. You would think that we work so hard on Pesach, getting rid of the chametz in our lives, getting rid of the ego in our lives, that on Shavuot, what should be forbidden also? We shouldn't be able to have chametz either, right? Because we just worked on getting rid of it all. What is the opposite is true? It's actually one of the only sacrifices where the mitzvah is to bring bread. So you have to bring leavened bread on Sukkot. Right? You bring up 2 the shnei halechem. Two breads. We actually brought bread. Chametz bread. It's after Passover, 7 weeks later on Shavuot, right? So which is the next Jewish holiday we celebrate the getting of the Torah.
Okay.
Where there were special sacrifices to bring.
Right.
Shavuot. Yeah.
Shavuot is, yes, okay.
Right.
Wait, what month? Okay.
Right now we're in the month of Nisan.
Right.
And then there's Iyar, and then there's Sivan. So it happens on the 6th day of the month of Sivan.
Right.
We stay up the whole night studying.
Yeah.
That one.
And we just had
Purim.
Purim. So we made fun of everything, and then we
got to work on ourselves and be in the month of miracles. That hope that Mashiach comes down. That's what the month of Nisan. So it's the month of miracles.
Oh, okay.
Went from the month of happiness to the month of miracles.
Oh.
All right, so we're going back to this, right? With Mashiach, on Shavuot, we're supposed to have chametz itself. We don't just have matzah. So the question is why? And we actually just text number 14. I think we're back to Ron or Phil. Back to you, Phil. Text number 14, where it talks about giving of the bread.
I think that's Ron, but I'll take it if you want.
I'll give you another chance, though.
Okay. From your dwelling places you shall bring bread for waving, 2 loaves made from 2 esronim. They shall be of fine flour, and they shall be baked, leavened, the first offering to God.
Right? They have to be leavened bread, and halacha and in Jewish law talks about those from Maimonides. That's in text number 15, Ron.
It is explicitly stated in the Torah that they should be leavened bread. How were they prepared? One would bring yeast from another place and place it into the isaron measure. He would then fill that measure with fine flour and let it leaven with that yeast.
Right. So not only did they just let it rise and become chametz, they even added yeast, right, a leavening agent to make it rise. We basically for sure wanted this to become chametz, right? That code of Jewish law tells us it has to be chametz, it has to be bread. So how is this possible? We worked so hard on ourselves for 7 weeks, right? Then we had the whole Pesach, we got rid of it, and then for 7 weeks we're working on getting rid of any ego in our lives. So suddenly at the end of it, now we're like, okay, now it's okay. Now you can go. Now you can have your ego back again. You could have your chametz back again. Why is this? Because not every type of ego is bad, right? We have to be proud. We have to be proud of being Jewish, right? That we can be. I guess we can have that ego about it, right? We're proud. We're proud of being Jews. We're proud of our connection to God. So, in the verse, we have a verse from the prophets that tells us about this, where it praises Yehoshaphat, one of the great kings of Yehuda, for possessing this attitude. That's the text number 16, Beverly.
His heart was proud in the ways of the Lord.
Right, and the Alter Rebbe explains why is this pride so important, Aaron?
The truth is that although one must exceedingly humble, nevertheless, one must be exceedingly humble. Nevertheless, a person should have some resolve, if even a bit of pride. For if one would not have any pride, they would never engage in service of God, for they would always belittle themselves, thinking, who am I? What is my service worth? Therefore, one needs to have some pride.
Right, we should not be egotistical. It's not telling us that suddenly you should become an egomaniac and like some people, right? We should not be an egomaniac, but you have to have pride at the end of the day. We have to be proud. We have to know your self-worth. You have to know what you're worth, right? It's not about putting yourself down. When it says that Moshe was the most humble of all men, yes, how is that possible? When Moshe knew he was the greatest leader of the Jews ever. What did that mean that he was the most humble of all people? That Moshe said, if someone else would have all the powers that God gave me, they would do it better. Moshe wasn't saying that he's a bad person, that he's nothing. Saying if someone else had what I had, they would do a better job than me, right? But he didn't put himself down, right? When we're saying to be humble is not about putting yourself down. You have to have that little bit of ego in us, that pride that I did something good, I did something right, right? But not to take it to the extreme and suddenly think you're the be all end all. Right. So that's what that so in the beginning, when we left Egypt, it was too dangerous for us to be focused on our pride at all, because we just came out of this full exile, this full Egyptian exile, where that's basically all we focused on for 210 years. We got to get rid of it fully. We were done. Like, we're not even focusing on this little bit of ego that you're allowed to have. We're getting rid of our ego fully, getting rid of all the chametz. Now, after the 7 weeks of transforming ourselves, now we can start reintroducing it and reintroducing this little bit of pride into us, being proud of our connection with God, being proud Jews, etc. So on Pesach, on the 8th day of Pesach, we already completed 1 week of this transformation, right? We completed our transformation of our attribute of kindness, of chesed. Right. So now, while we're still not fully ready to accept that we can have some pride in our lives, we're not as worried anymore. Still about the ego, about our ego anymore, about the chametz. And that's why on Achar Pesach, the last day of Pesach, we're allowed to have that matzah. We're allowed to have that matzah shruya, that wet matzah, because we already started to work on transforming ourselves, and we had a whole week of transforming ourselves. We're already, like, we know that we're not supposed to be egotistical anymore. So we're not as worried anymore. All right, that's a second reason why we have that wet matzah on Pesach. I started that we're very careful to not have any kind of liquid touch our matzah. So why and then on the last day of Pesach, we're careful to have it with everything. The question is why? One of the reasons why is because it's connected with Mashiach, where Mashiach chametz is going to be okay again. So to have a hint of what chametz would be like when Mashiach comes, we don't, God forbid, have chametz, but we're not as careful about dipping our matzah in water anymore, because every taste of it gives us that taste of what it's going to be like when Mashiach comes. And in addition, it's because we already had worked on our ego for that whole week already, and and we know that we're already better than what we were. Right? And the way we could bring this into our own lives, we could focus on the way that how do we perfect it? We perfected one part of our attributes every single day. So we could try this in our own lives, where we focus on one thing we want to fix today. You don't approach it that I need to fix my entire life today. I want to fix one thing. I want to be better in this. Even I want to be better in one particular detail in this, right? Because we transform our attributes, one detail in the attribute at a time, 1/7 of the attribute at a time, right? We transform the severity of kindness today, right? So when that's what we can take it into our own lives. We try to transform one additional thing of one particular part of us every single day, and that'll help us become better people and to realize how proper people should be. And it's not that it's easy, but it's not as hard as it may seem. And God willing, in this month of miracles, we should have the ultimate miracle of Mashiach, which will solve all the problems that we have all around the world. And we should have the Nissim, where all our hostages should come home, and we should win that final war. L'chaim.
Amen.
And have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good night.
Are you guys